Welcome to another episode of the Back to School Shootings podcast. My name is David Reedman. I'm the creator of the K-12 school shooting database. And the criminal justice system, specifically the corrections system, sits with three priorities. It's that when somebody commits a serious crime, they're going to be confined and separated from society. And during that confinement, they're being punished for the crime that they committed. But ultimately, if they're going to be released, which almost everybody who commits a crime is released at some point, they are supposed to be rehabilitated. They're supposed to be better when they come out of prison than when they went in. And that's why it's called corrections. It's not the Department of Confinement. It's the Department of Correcting a wrong. And a wrong that happens that seems so visceral is when somebody commits a school shooting. That they have taken a gun into a school, that they've fired that weapon, that they had the intent to harm themselves or others. But often that person who commits a school shooting goes to prison. And during that time in prison, they are confined for the safety of society. They're punished for that crime, but there's a point when they get out and they should be rehabilitated. They should be better. They should be able to exist in society. And the guest that I have today has exactly that experience. Jon Romano, thank you so much for joining the Back to School Shooting podcast.
Thank you, David. I definitely appreciate the opportunity to come and talk with you and your listeners.
So, Jon, for people that don't know your backstory, what happened on February 9th, 2004 that ultimately led to you going to prison?
Yeah, so February 9th, 2004, I was 16 years old when I did the unthinkable. I was at a point where I not only wanted to die, but I wanted other people to feel my pain. I went into my high school, Columbia High School in East Greenbush, New York, and I had a 12-gauge shotgun with me. Now, my intent was to die in a public fashion, but I wanted to terrorize other people in the meantime. I knew that obviously Columbine had just happened a few years prior. I knew the devastation that had wreaked on so many people. And I wanted to do something similar, not with the intent of killing and shooting other people, but I knew that obviously going into my high school would traumatize countless people. And it's been over 20 years. There's still people suffering from PTSD from what I did that day. But my ultimate goal was to have the police show up and to kill me. I couldn't manage to pull the trigger on myself at home. I thought about going into the woods, but ultimately I also felt like, I didn't want to take accountability for how my life was. I wanted to blame other people and I wanted them to suffer because of what I believe had gone wrong in my life. So that morning when I went in, I drove myself in late that day. And yeah, I did go and I went and hid inside of a bathroom on the second floor. Eventually I would come out because for a long time I was literally sitting in the bathroom just freaking out because suddenly the idea of doing this became reality and I didn't want to go through with it. But I also started to believe I was at the point of no return. And I try to tell people today, you're never at the point of no return. Anybody can stop themselves, whether they're wanting to hurt themselves or others. There is no point where you can't turn around and do something different. But so I did go out into the hallway. I came across a couple of students. The first one was actually coming into the bathroom as I was coming out. And he froze in front of me. He was 15 and he was just thinking it's any other day at school. And so he freezes up in front of me and literally says, this can't be happening. But he turns and he runs away and I come out and I just, walking down the hall with the gun down at my hip. I see two other students. They're coming around a corner about 30, 40 feet away from me. And I just kind of aim up and away and fire off a couple of shots. They turn, run, thinking that they were about to die. And yeah, I walked around for a bit. even stepped inside of a classroom because the door was wide open. And I think I just wanted to see other people. I wanted to see them up close, and I wanted them to see me up close in my last moments. I didn't want to feel alone in that time. And unfortunately, I saw nothing but terror in their eyes, which is what I had thought about I wanted, but I wanted nothing like that. And I hope everybody else knows that for anybody who's ever thinking about doing something like this, it's not going to be the way that you think it is. It's not going to give you any type of pleasure or happiness. You're not going to feel better. You're going to feel worse. And even if you die, you're going to die in the state of despair. You're not going to die feeling like you're going out in a blaze of glory. And yeah, so I turned and I left the classroom, and I was just walking down the hallway waiting for the police when vice principal, he had heard those first two shots, and he came up behind me and he grabbed at the gun, and we were kind of, standing there kind of trying to battle for control of the gun. And unfortunately, my finger was on the trigger, and I didn't know there was a teacher coming up behind us to help the vice principal. And, during the struggle, the gun goes off and the teacher was hit in the shin. I didn't even know I had shot somebody until later on. But yeah, so eventually I couldn't get control of the gun, and I let go and I gave up, and that was it. They had me wait for the police, and I ended up spending 17 years in prison for what I did that day. But
so before we get into prison,
mm-hmm.
I want to talk about the days and weeks and months leading up to you carrying a gun into your high school, because there's a misconception that a school shooting might be something that's sudden. It might be something that's committed by a stranger, by a bad actor who's there because it's a soft target and they just want to get attention. But from my research, from looking at more than 200 planned attacks at schools in detail, it's almost always a student or a former student who has a deep connection to that school, has a specific grievance, has something where everything that's wrong in their life, everything that is happening to them, that they're experiencing, that they feel depressed, and suicidal and lost and isolated from, becomes connected to that school. And can you talk about the process that you went through that would ultimately lead up to you taking the gun into the school that day?
Yeah, definitely. Like you said, the pathway to violence begins with a grievance. And so I was somebody who had been going to that school. And when I began to have problems about a year beforehand, I had problems with my own mental health, but I was somebody who actually asked for help. I called my mom from school one day and I said, something's wrong with me. I just don't feel right. I can't make it through another day of school. I just need something different. I need help. And my mom came and picked me up, took me to the doctor, we got into therapy. But the grievance with the school began when basically I approached the administration saying, hey, I'm getting a lot of attention for my mental health taken care of on the outside. I need a little bit of help while I'm here. I would like an IEP, I would like some extra tutoring. I need to get my life back on track and I need your help to do so. And they told me no. They told me that they couldn't give me an IEP. They couldn't give me the extra tutoring. I could sign up for a tutor with another student, which I tried, and the student was basically never showing up. I explained that to them. They didn't care. Even when I attempted to end my own life, I ended up in a mental hospital. And because I was 15 at the time, I was required to continue doing schoolwork while in the mental hospital. My school refused to send any classwork for me to do while I was in the hospital. And, even the hospital, there's 15 other kids my age, all of them from around the area, all of them getting their classwork. And I felt singled out, and I felt like my school just didn't care about me. And this isn't to blame them. I never want anybody to think that I'm justifying or blaming them. This is just what was going on in my distorted, disturbed mind was, they don't care about me, and even when I got out of the mental hospital and I still pushed to get more help there, it wasn't until my mom had hired an attorney, and the attorney basically told the school, you're going to face a lawsuit and bad publicity. And those were the magic words for suddenly now the school was willing to help me, to give me an IEP, to give me all this extra help that I needed. Um, but it was too little too late. This all began where they wanted to suddenly help me in May. The school year was over. I failed most of my classes, and I was fed up. So the following year, I was going to be turning 16 and I wanted to drop out. I wanted to start taking classes at a community college where I found out I could be dual enrolled, where even though I was still technically enrolled at the high school, I was enrolled at the community college where I could take some classes there. And while I'm gaining college credits, I'm also getting my GED in the process. And this seemed to be going all right, but sometimes the high school would be calling and complaining about how I'm not attending them anymore. And the fact that because I turned 16 after the school year started, they said that I couldn't legally drop out from the high school. But I had started taking classes and was feeling a bit better. But ultimately, also, I never dealt with the deeper issues, even when I went to therapy. I dealt with a lot of superficial stuff, but I didn't dive deeper the way I should have. I didn't allow myself to become vulnerable and shed light on some of the real darkness within me.
And that's a common theme, I think, across the school shootings that I've studied and even shootings in public places, is that there's somebody who is not necessarily on a complete spiral. They're on an up and down, and every time they're coming up, the down gets lower. The life course becomes more and more derailed. I think it's really clear from the writings of the Oxford, Michigan school shooter that he was dealing with a number of the same things with depression and suicidal ideation, also some other kind of more severe mental health issues, but he was suffering from abuse. He was asking his parents for help throughout this. He was asking for help at school. And in each one of these places, as he would climb up a little bit, he would fall back down even lower. And the social safety net would not catch him. And then on a recent podcast, looked in detail at the CVPA School Shooters Manifesto. And that was in St. Louis a couple of years ago. And he wrote in detail in his journals about the feelings of suicide, of wanting to commit suicide, of wanting to do something public, of wanting to be seen, of feeling invisible. It's a common theme. And I mean, the reason that it's important to hear from people like you is because we need to demystify this. There's a person who's crying for help, who wants help. And thinking of those months leading up to the attack, what could have stopped you from ever taking that gun to school?
Yeah, so I think some type of mediation would have been helpful. If I could have had somebody who the school administration respected and who was also unbiased and willing to kind of be that mediator and to kind of really help out and make sure that everything was on the table instead of me holding some things back from them or them holding back. And not to mention, I think it's more on my personal life. Let me not talk too much about what was going on at school, but also my personal life. It's not just what you said about feeling invisible or unheard, but there's also a desire to feel more power and control in one's life. And obviously, I think so many teenagers and adults feel like we just don't have that much power and control. And I think that's kind of what attracted me to the idea of weapons, of guns, is it gives you a false sense of power and control. But to get back to your question, I talk a lot with people, and especially teenagers. There is a way that you can have power and control in your life. Better communication skills, learning how to really get your point across in a respectful manner so that the other party understands where you're coming from and that you can also listen and see where they're coming from. And hopefully you can meet somewhere in the middle. So I think emotional intelligence is a huge part. understanding one's own emotions and then being able to communicate them and being able to connect with people. I think connections is one of the biggest things. And also realizing that I wasn't alone because there were so many times where I did feel alone. Even when I had my mom, my family, and some friends who were helping me out, like depression and mental health issues really play a trick on your brain where I remember sitting in my living room full of friends. We're hanging out, watching TV, got my girlfriend by my side. Seems like everything a 15-year-old would want. And I felt completely alone. Not because I didn't think that these friends didn't like me, but that's just how I felt so often. And I wish I'd been able to find a way of connecting with myself first, and then I would have been able to connect with others. And I think that's the tricky part where we have to allow people to open up and to feel comfortable because when, sorry, I had a technical issue. I apologize. So I believe that one of the things that we can be doing is allowing teenagers to express themselves, allowing adults to express themselves, and allowing people to feel comfortable even when they're not feeling okay. Because when they open up, they can just let it all out and we can be more non-judgmental and we can help connect people with the resources that they need. So,
And that's the other misconception is it's part of the fiction that's been created with the post-Columbine lore that the school shooter is going to be this isolated kid in a trench coat and goth makeup who has no friends and no connections. But in reality, it's not so much about the social structure. There are school shooters that have been varsity athletes, that have had friends, that have had girlfriends at the time of the attack, that it's about what's going on inside that person, internally, what everyone else is not seeing can be the driver. And if you don't have adults with an understanding and systems to notice that someone's in crisis, to be checking in with people, to be going beyond the box of, is this student coming to class every day and getting decent grades? It's about that accountability throughout the entire community to make sure that there aren't people that are being forgotten in the ways that aren't immediately visible. So now fast forwarding from, you had those weeks and months leading up to the shooting. There was your planned attack that day. You're tackled by the principal and taken down, and now you're in the criminal justice system and the correctional system as a 16-year-old, and you're ultimately sentenced to 20 years in prison starting at 16. How does your life look then? What's that experience of going from being a high school kid with friends and a girlfriend and living in society to now being incarcerated at 16 years old?
yeah, so I was definitely disconnected from everything. I think that when I did the shooting, I had to disconnect myself from what I had done, from the pain and suffering I'd caused for so many people. Mentally, I couldn't handle it. And even in jail, I look back and I realize how numb I was, how I just wasn't present in the moment, and I didn't care. I just kind of, realized this is going to be my life for a long time. While in Rome, do as the Romans. And initially, even though I had friends, family, and even people from the community connecting with me, I was just, involved in prison politics because in New York State at that time, 16, you're an adult. I go to the adult maximum security prisons, and so, yeah, for a while, I'm not going to lie, I just got caught up in prison politics and living my day in prison from, everybody knew who I was. I was kind of a jailhouse celebrity, as they call them. And, there are some people, obviously, who didn't like me for what I had done. But there was also most guys, I think a little bit of like paternal instinct kicked in with some of the older guys who took me under their wing and kind of helped me out a bit because seeing me so young where I barely had to shave, suddenly in this crazy environment, there were some guys who wanted to take care of me, and I'm grateful for that because eventually I did kind of see through the prison politics and see how it's a large farce. And within a couple of years of not just my friends and family and community believing in me, but even other guys in prison who saw me as somebody who was young. And yeah, 20-year sentence sounds like forever, but because I was so young, they knew I'd be coming home young. And a lot of guys were, encouraging me to turn my life around. And eventually I did. I did start to open up to the idea of this isn't going to be my life forever. I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired, and I'm ready to try something different.
So that's what I opened the show with, those pillars, that the correction system is about confinement to separate someone from society, punishment because you're there not allowed to be free, but ultimately if anybody is getting out of prison, the purpose of that prison needs to be to make them a better person, a more functional person, a contributor to society when they leave. What transitioned and what opportunities did you have to set yourself up on the path that you are today while you were in prison? What programs or things really worked for you?
Yeah, so it's all about your support system, whether you're in prison or outside of prison. And I was blessed to have a great support system of family, friends, community, of plenty of guys on the inside. But eventually, I would get into a program that was called the Merrill Cooper program. And it was a therapeutic community that was, for the most part, we were housed only with other people in the program. We would interact with general population from time to time, but they wanted us to be housed with each other so that we could be partaking in group therapy sessions, in self-help classes, and, a lot of the things that you would want people in prison to be doing. So I was blessed to have that and to interact with, there was a therapist there who was unlike any other, and she was really able to help me out in a lot of ways. And I'll tell you, there was one book that I highly recommend for people to check out. It's written for prisoners, but it's a great book overall. It is called Houses of Healing by Robin Kasarjian. And that book was really one of the first steps for me to turn my life around because it talked about dealing with childhood trauma. It talked about that inner child, that you got to really heal yourself in order to push yourself forward, and that you can use your shame and guilt and remorse as a way of pushing you forward in a positive way. Because for a long time, I felt numb, but I also felt low. That guilt and shame weighed on me. And my therapist and this book said, listen, you have to use that guilt and shame to build yourself up in a better way so that you are never like the person you once were and that you can become the person you always wanted to be. And so that was really, like I said, monumental in me turning my life around and healing some old wounds, dealing with what I had done at 16, the trauma that I imposed on other people, and how I could possibly go on to live a better life and one where I could also help people instead of hurting so many as I already have.
And that's, the big misconception about school shootings is we think that it's infamy, that somebody wants to be known, to be famous, to kind of be remembered forever as that school shooter, but really that the person who's thinking about a school shooting, the person who gets to the point of carrying out the school shooting is a person who wants to die. It is a death of despair. And if you think about a school shooter as an other, as a monster, in reality, they're a member of the community. And they are one of the most vulnerable, injured, low members of that community right up until the point of violence. And at every single point before that shooting takes place, there's somebody that needs help. There's somebody that needs help more than just about anybody else that's there, but they've been forgotten. They've been overlooked. There hasn't been a system or a safety net in place to help them. And I think that that's where the discussion gets derailed when we think about intervention with armed guards or fortification or, turning the school more or less into a prison. You're not addressing any of those root causes of why this is happening. And I think that's something that I didn't think of initially when I started studying this topic, about 6 years ago now. I didn't even really know what school shooting means. Like, from your journey, what does school shooting even mean to you?
Yeah, so there's definitely all different types, and when we're talking about data and everything, there's no one definition, which I know that you've explored a bit, and kind of it's difficult because a parent can be in the parking lot picking up their kid and accidentally fire their gun on their hip or whatever, and that might be ruled as a school shooting because it happened on school property. Um, but I think obviously the ones that we are trying to address and the ones that we are trying to prevent are the ones where somebody is trying to hurt themselves or others. And I would like to go back and just mention how you talked about how some people view that school shooters must be doing this because they are loners, that they're bullied, or that they're looking for infamy, right? So, first off, there's definitely a mixture of people who go out and carry out an attack like this. I think at the core, it's like you had already said, it's people who are hurting. And I think a lot of other people think we have to justify this somehow. They must have been being bullied. They must have been picked on. They must have been hated by their classmates, because somebody like, who would never think about carrying this out, they want to have a justification that makes sense. They want to have this exterior motive outside of the shooter that caused it, something that they can somewhat kind of understand. Well, if they're constantly being picked on, if nobody wants to hang out with them, then of course they're wanting to do something like this. When in reality, that might be the cause sometimes, but other times, it's people who are just having something going on within them. And because the school for a teenager is kind of the center of their world most of the time, that's where they spend most of their day. That's where most of their friends are at. So that's the center of their world. So for me, when I carried out the shooting that I did, I had no thoughts of like, I want everybody in America to know who I am. I just wanted the people at the school to know who I was and to face the problems that I wanted to blame on them, although it wasn't their fault. But I think that's one thing that more people I would hope would understand is that it's somebody who is, not only they're not looking for national attention, although some people might write that in their journals. They just want to be seen and heard by the people who they interact with on a day-to-day basis. They want to have some power and control over their life. And obviously we have to find what is a healthier way that they can go about doing this, or how can somebody who sees the red flags intercede and help them and get them whatever resources they may need, whether it's institutionalization or just better therapy, better mediation, better connection with somebody somewhere.
And as I've looked at shootings on campus, all types of shootings, more than 2,800 of them over the last 60 years, I actually think they're far more connected than we think, because that planned attack where it's somebody who feels lost, who feels like they want to die, who feels like they want to be noticed, is that very much different from a student who takes a gun to school to commit suicide? There have been more than 200 suicides that have taken place, many of them in a public manner in the school, in the cafeteria, in the auditorium, at the front of a classroom. And with that suicide, with wanting everybody else to witness the pain, another thing, the second most common situation in a school is an accident. And often it's a student who's showing a gun off to classmates. They're saying, I have this gun. I want you to know that I have this gun. And they accidentally fire it. And the most common situation at a school is a fight that escalates into a shooting. So there's a student who is a habitual gun carrier. They get into a fight with another student. They pull the gun and they start firing shots. Well, what does it take for a teenager to think that they have to carry a gun to school every day? They have to feel victimized. They have to feel like they're lacking safety or security or personal agency, and they need something that's powerful that's going to let them, levy that force against others. And then domestic violence is something that's also prevalent at schools, because pickup and drop off are these times when a domestic partner knows that their spouse and kids are going to be at the school. And there have been these targeted attacks that have happened during pickup or dismissal. In each one of those cases, there are red flags that are being missed. There's somebody that fundamentally is fearing for their safety. And that's either leading to a missed opportunity to help them, like those domestic violence or suicide cases, or somebody that feels that the social safety nets aren't keeping them safe, so they have to take safety into their own hands. I just see this entire landscape of gun violence at schools is all occurring for fundamentally the same reasons, and can probably be addressed with those same types of interventions, because engaging with a kid who's depressed or suicidal is going to be the same type of engagement that a kid who thinks they have to carry a gun because they've been beat up too many times on the way home from school. But what this leads to is there are a huge number of kids who are entering the criminal justice system because they have guns in school, because they might be talking about a shooting or a threat, or maybe they're in the early phases of planning something, who knows if they're going to carry out or not. But there are hundreds of kids every year who end up as teenagers entering the criminal justice system. Based on your experience, what would be the best pathway to help them become successful people for the rest of their lives?
So for anybody who has gone through with that, right, who has made threats or, showed off weapons to somebody and has been arrested, I think it's pretty similar to how we can treat anybody who's ended up in the criminal justice system, is if we can allow them to realize that your life is not over. There is hope, because for me, a long time, hope was a dangerous idea. But we have to give people hope. We have to let them know that, if they are separated from society in the correctional system for a while, well, all right, we need to help them while they're in there. We need to help them heal whatever trauma. We need to make them feel safe when they come home so that they don't feel like they have to carry again, and to kind of go at those root causes of safety, security, and if somebody does have that, even a domestic violence situation where they want to carry out an attack against a partner or a family member, is working with them to see that that's not going to solve your problems. That's not going to make you feel better. It might sound like common sense to some people, but it's not being addressed, because I'll be honest, my experiences in the correctional facility system in New York State were very different than most people. The program that I had been in was shut down shortly after I completed it. The prison system does not want to actually help people turn their lives around. Most of the help that I also got were from outside sources. People on the outside who kept reaching out to me, or Bard College, they were allowed into the prison system to, give college classes to inmates. I was able to do that, not because the, prison system wanted it to happen. They just allowed it to happen, and begrudgingly so sometimes. But we need to change how we view prisons. As you said, 95% or so of people who become incarcerated are eventually released. So how do you want that person to come home who may end up living in your neighborhood? Do you want them to spend their time having people who believe in them and helping them out and, really challenging them to look at themselves and to turn their lives around? Or do you want somebody who's just locked up and is just, getting a job cleaning up cells and going out to the yard and working out and just waiting to go home? How do you want somebody to be serving their time? I would rather have people who are, going to self-help classes, having mental health being a core part of their experience in the prison system. Because we talk a lot about education, which is great. We talk a lot about vocational training, which is great in the prison system, but we need more mental health advocacy. We need more mental health resources, not just in prisons, but around our country, period.
I completely agree with you. And with the lack of mental health resources, often in the aftermath of a school shooting or the aftermath of a kid who's caught with a gun at school, the immediate discourse around that is that this was a failure of the parents. This is a failure of parenting. But from what I've seen, there are many cases where a parent, one or both, or the lack of structure, somebody that might be in halfway houses or foster care or other things, there is no kind of parental structure, or there's even a negative parental structure if the teenager is experiencing abuse at home. How can other people in the community, other adults, maybe the parents of friends, teachers, other school staff members, how can those people spot warning signs and take action if the parents themselves might be part of the problem?
Yeah, so I'll say that some of the warning signs that I see looking back on my life are a lot of the warning signs that go with a lot of people who are struggling. If you notice somebody who suddenly their grades are slipping, I went from like a B student, sometimes A's, to suddenly C's, D's, and F's. So that's a huge red flag that maybe somebody's not on the path to do something horrible like I did, but somebody is struggling when that happens. The same with I started smoking cigarettes, I started drinking alcohol, and I hid it from my mom, but I'm sure other people in the community saw me, walking around with friends, smoking and drinking and, acting a fool. I started to get into trouble, not big trouble. Like I wasn't getting into a bunch of fights and stuff like that, but I was kind of the quiet trouble. I was skipping class. I was skipping entire days of school. And so these might be common for a lot of kids, but it's also a lot of kids, they're going through something. They're not dedicated to having a healthy lifestyle. Something's going on, whether it's internal or external, whether it's problems at home or friends who are kind of leading them astray. These are the most common warning signs that apply to so many situations, my own included.
Man, that's a great point. And the last question that I'm going to get you out of here on is right now, if by chance there's a kid listening to this podcast and they're thinking about committing a school shooting, because we know that often research school shootings, look at others, what would you tell that kid to get them to stop before they make that life-changing decision of pulling a trigger?
Yeah, so I actually talk with kids sometimes who are in that mindset, because I put myself out there on social media to kind of share my journey of, turning my life around and how I believe we can help prevent these things from happening. And a lot of kids reach out to me, and I'll tell anybody who's listening right now the same thing I tell those kids is, you don't want to die. You don't want others to die either. You want to have a better life. You just don't believe that you can achieve it. And I think that you can achieve it. We have to just connect you with the right people. And you might not believe that those people exist, but trust me, they do. We just have to get you with them. And if anybody ever wants to reach out to me, I'm here. I hope you don't mind me saying social media, Jon Seeking Peace. That's what I use. TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat. My email is johnseekingpeace@gmail.com. People can always reach out to me. And if nothing else, I'll just listen to you. I'm not going to judge you. I've been in your shoes. I know what it's like to be in the darkness. I know what it's like to feel like your life is never going to be light again. I know what it's like to feel like there's just no meaning or purpose, and that you hate the world because there's so much chaos around us as well as within us. But I'm here to tell you, I've been through hell and back many times, and life is worth living. You do have to fight for it, unfortunately, but I and so many others will help you fight. You just have to reach out to us, and we will do everything we can to help you.
Well, thank you so much. Jon Romano committed the unthinkable act of taking a gun into his school, and he paid a very heavy price for that. And when something happens, you can decide what direction you want your life to go in. I think that this is a really important discussion to understand that these attacks are not random. These attacks are also not inevitable. And when something like this does happen, there are a lot of people within a community, within a family, within that had an opportunity to do something. And so we need to know that every single one of us can be the person who makes a difference in keeping somebody from slipping to that point of despair. So all of Jon's links are in the show notes below. Jon Romano, thank you so much for being on the Back to School Shooting podcast.
Thank you, David, and thank you to your listeners. And like you said, you never know when a small act of kindness and compassion can really help turn somebody's life around and prevent tragedy.
Take care. Thank you.
All right.